Welcome back to Selling Circular. My name is Sabira Lakhani, and I am joined by Garr Punnett.
Garr Punnett, there we go. CEO
what do you do,
Loop
Garr
Layer.
Punnett? There it is.
Yes, founding Loop Layer right now, which I'm going to get into the existentialness of that in my segment coming up.
Ooh, very cool. And
Yes.
I currently am with Team Reaply, and we are both circular economy passionists. That's not a word, but it feels right.
Economy. Well, we've said circular economist before, and I've always liked that one. And that kind of takes me to where I'm going today a little bit, where we're going to do our nerd out section.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I can say a little bit about. Oh.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, what is Selling Circular? Because you told me to say this.
I did. Yeah, I did. And we need to get better about introing not just us, but also the podcast. So please, yes, take it away.
Well, we are a team of two, dare I say a dynamic duo. And I can't, I feel ridiculous, but it's funny. We love talking to industry practitioners, experts, people who have been working on building or trying to build a circular economy and running into real life challenges and successes. And in every episode, we pick a new topic that we like to cover and try to bring those challenges and successes to life. And so whether you're a startup or a big company, you're likely facing some roadblocks. And we like to unpack what selling circular to the world looks like.
I like to think we're getting into that intro, which is we're like kind of freshmen and sophomores in podcasting right now. So we're like kind of taking ourselves seriously, but still not. And it's like now we need to grow up. So we're getting there. We're maturing along with everybody as well in the field, which is why we're doing this. So today, kind of what I'm talking about and the existential nature of founding a circular company, and when you and I work together at a circular company, is trying to understand the market, trying to read the market, understanding where the gaps are in the market. And I've been just thinking so much about this as I've just been poring over research, finding my way through what is the business model I hope to pursue, as well as what is the product I hope to make to add value to our industry. And then very specifically, the industry I look to serve is the remanufacturing industry, as I see it as one more important component to circularity. I've been reading a lot by Paul Graham, who most famously is the co-founder of the seed capital firm Y Combinator in the Bay Area. Legendary in our business of startups, not the end all be all, but an excellent contributor towards the growth of many of the companies that we not only hold dear to our economy, but also that we use in our everyday existence. And so reading him has been very interesting, as it's quite frankly, there's been a lot as of late as a solo founder right now that I've got a lot of value out of being a little bit lost in the sauce of it, and having him talk about what it's like to see founders, or what it was like to found himself, or the mentality that it takes, and that it's okay. And that's kind of the process. And one of these phrases and these quotes that I've loved, that has given me peace in my own founding journey, is this idea that the best way to discover companies and foster ideas is to look at the broken models, and to be strict with the broken models that we see, and understand that what makes them broken does not make them bad. It might make them obsolete, but it's also the brokenness that gives us clues. And there was something about that clue of where, Sabira, I know you know this from your work at Reaply and specifically on the product side, which is we're here to discover truth in use and value of a product. Not make something up and convince someone of something, but to find the nugget of reality that we're hoping to affect or the problem that we hope to solve.
Mhm.
And so it's in understanding these current models that others tend to ignore these trails of clues, but it's up to us to try to go find the genuine truth in those clues and try to figure out how to piece together a solution. How does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I was thinking, like, what are the analogies that come to mind? Like, what does broken mean? It's almost like, if you're a doctor, what symptoms are you looking for? Like,
Exactly.
what is the species or the organism telling you, but not, maybe, like, if it's a child, might not be able to explicitly tell you, but it can give you clues. So there's that came to mind as an image. And then also personally in my own life, like, the for me, it was seeing waste on the ground in India.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
the symptom
Exactly.
that other people didn't. I remember particularly one time my cousin threw, like, a wrapper outside the car door, and I was just like, why do you need to do that? And just like, and then, like, the
Yeah.
pure, like, vitriol in response to my question was, ugh. And now, like, a decade later, he knows not to do that because
Yes.
I'm his cousin.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. And so those are
Yeah.
all systems of a problem. And where I hope to nerd out in this section a little bit is the analysis of problem with expectation of what you're trying to create in a system versus what we're trying to do in circular economy, what we're trying to create in circular economic solutions. I want to juxtapose it with one of the greatest, I think it is the greatest business model of our time. And it's Amazon. And both and I think we can hold this in tension, both the economic force that is both positive and potentially destructive. But it still came from a broken system. It came from a need to have a better selection. And as you can see here, started in 1994, it was really this understanding that Bezos saw that, if I create this online opportunity, I can hold 3 million titles in my digital bookshop that I couldn't hold in a physical bookshop, which gave more authors a voice, which gave more opportunities for people to gain more knowledge. And creating that online bookstore, was just a vastly different opportunity than what was traditionally in a brick and mortar physical location. Most famously, he scribbled the business model on a napkin, on a piece of paper, where it was all about how are we actually generating value for the customers. And that in turn would generate more traffic, would generate more sales or sellers, and would generate a better selection, but ultimately still adding to the customer experience and generating growth. That this commonly is understood to be one of the most successful flywheel motions of our time for a business model. And it's in that growth that we see, again, both success factors of people making a living, but then also probably the redistribution of wealth from certain shop owners locally to maybe broader sellers at a scaled operation. And so there's destructive capacity in there, but ultimately too, that's for all of us to decide what our priorities are as consumers. I still respect, though, the flywheel, this very simple business model that said if we can get more sellers that provide more selection, that can offer a better consuming experience to our client, to our consumer, that will increase traffic and we'll just see it compound from there. And that's been the case for the last 30 years.
So just to make sure we're not endorsing Amazon as a you're highlighting the
business
growth model. The growth
Exactly.
the growth model of Amazon is something to admire and learn from, but Amazon itself
to be determined. I think it is, I can hold both intention of saying, wow, phenomenally successful, while also be not a consumer, and try to find every way to not just easily do a one-click buy option. So again, that's ultimately probably our greatest challenge as consumers in this age is holding in tension our values with the ease of what we can purchase. And that's just the best that we can do. What I did want to call into attention to was the process was and is still not successful in terms of e-commerce is very successful, but ultimately there's always new problems. And so when we think of e-commerce, especially for our generation, we grew up probably in the middle. Like you and I got a lot of the brick and mortar, and then in our teenage years, we straddled the generation of e-commerce.
Yes.
I don't quite remember. I do remember the days where there wasn't as much selection or you couldn't get everything at your fingertips. But I don't quite remember some of these problems. And so it's interesting and I'm going to make a big juxtaposition here with the growth of circular economy business models, is there was a lot of poor content. So terrible images were put onto to represent products. There was too much friction in the checkout process, which was how you had to add new profiles to every service that you had. And now there's many other options to make that very easy. Misalignment between what might have been in store and what might have been online. We might even still find that sometimes as we're constantly price gauging what our preferences are. Very much still in process here is the lack of return policies. That's going to be interesting. And there's actually more reverse logistics problems in that we've actually talked about with some of our guests before, which is how expensive return policies are versus what we think we're offering to consumers versus maybe what we're potentially and inappropriately enabling in terms of consumption behavior. So a good, juxtaposition there. But in the early days too, there was insufficient market research and understanding what customers were looking for online. That's going to be a big one coming up. Another big one, inadequate business planning and execution. How do you communicate what you're offering online while also having in store versus do your economics change now? Of course they do. There's a whole new set of logistics parameters. You aren't operating maybe as many in physical locations. And then all of that gets bundled up into how are you telling that story? What's your visibility online? How are you relating the value of an online experience to a consumer who's been walking into a storefront for their entire lifetime? And so as we straddled this generation of e-commerce, we've become adept. But this is where we have a great reconciling ahead. And this is where, in the existential crisis of it all, who are we as consumers? What am I providing and looking to seek to build? We have to find the clues in what's broken. And when we're finding those clues, you and I, we look towards the linear economy. We look towards this and say, our biggest clues are that last bucket there. The last bin where everything just goes to cease operating. Now, this isn't for anybody who's listening, again, in our audience is probably well adept at this, but for anybody new listening, this is about not just where things go to out of our life, but it's the value lost in that equation.
Yeah.
It's the dollar signs lost in that equation. And so as we start to think about what a recycling economy means, it's one more now change in the direction of what typically would be the linear economy. So for us, that's another clue being, okay, maybe there's a way where we can recapture that value and reapply it back to our consumption model. But we're still a leaky faucet. We're still a leaky faucet of an economy. And so when we start to actually see what a circular economy could look like, where it's actually about capturing that value, not necessarily about waste, but value, capturing it, and then redistributing that back into a value chain, doesn't this start to look a little bit more like a flywheel? Where we start to have a little bit more traction and understanding towards what is the actual value of that waste, and how can I build a model that recaptures that and then sends it back into use, recapturing that value. And so with that, we actually have, probably the first 5, I think, sets of business models. And you and I can talk about this here, and I'd love to see where this sparks for you, which is, we mentioned this with, I think we actually mentioned this with Benny, where we are talking about we're in circular economy 1.0. So just as much as there are all that list of problems with e-commerce 1.0, well, we're going to solve those. We have to solve them. It's of priority both economically and environmentally. And so with that comes a better addressing of waste as an asset. Try to better understand how to not treat waste as a liability, but something that value could be derived from. Jump in at any moment when you want to, or else I'll keep going here, Sabira. Because number 2 is the sharing economy. Go for it.
Yeah. I was going to say the challenges with waste becoming an input today are aggregation and quality, and the aggregation comes from just like a spatial problem, right? The Amazons of the world distribute material in the form of goods all over the globe, and then how do you actually collect them back for them to become useful as an asset, not a liability? Big challenge.
This is the fun part about 1.0 is we're moving from a space that is concept, and it's taken time, right? We're moving from a space of concept and priority and seeing the value to now understanding what our limitations are. So now we're actually understanding circular economic boundaries, and we can start to build that list just as e-commerce 1.0 had a list of things that they weren't good at. Now circular economy can start building a list and saying, wow, aggregation, collection, all of these lists that we just now need to refigure out the economic models of, which gets into the sharing economy. I mean, that's one of those probably early adopting circular economy principles where it was made most popular by, not owning a car and using a service to get yourself around, or anything that you're sharing. That could be a tool library. It could be, I'm trying to think of other ones here on the fly, Sabira. It could be
your house.
Your house, exactly, of course. And your spare house, I guess, or your spare room, in the case of Airbnb. But exactly, products as a service. And I'm not going to spend too much time going through all of these, but because you and I know these, and I imagine our audience does too, but it's again highlighting just the evolution where now we're starting to see more of an understanding of value, and not in terms of physical object, but time use, an actual service of use. And so how do we actually start to realign our economics to understand time when it comes to value generated?
I really like this one.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I like this one, but I think this is super challenging and complex for manufacturers or sellers to kind of reimagine how they would deliver this.
Yeah, this is the fun one because, and I probably use this a little too liberally, but I often say that this one's sort of the holy grail, where it's redefining not just a value chain and a reverse logistics system, but it's redefining socially how we think of ownership, which is a harder challenge to overcome. And so, but that will happen if we can prove out the economics. It can happen if people understand that, I don't have to own a car. It actually turns out there's this new service where my neighborhood can own a car. And we actually don't, I'm misusing ownership. Our neighborhood has use of the car, and we know, and it might be the same car. It might be a different car because the car's in the shop, but we don't care because we just pay for the time.
Right. We pay for the time.
And so we see a lot more of these models in different countries. The most famous one probably is washing machines, where you're paying for use per wash, not ownership over years. And so those are always fascinating it's so funny for me. It twists my brain sometimes where I'm like, well, it's mine. Like I want to own it. But that's not, it's not necessarily the case. Or it doesn't need to be the case. Product use extension. We know this one. This is just better design, but we talked about this too. And with one of our guests of feedback loops, how do we better understand and it actually might be an upcoming guest now that I think about it, that we've, so look forward to Liz coming up. But how do we talk about that, the repairability and the understanding of what that can mean for iteration of design and communicating that feedback to those making the products?
Yeah. And the tricky balance here is designing for durability, but also then the next life, which you kind of capture here, reusability, upgradability, repairability, because you could design something to live for 20 years, but if it's only being used for 1 year and then getting thrown out, then that high quality input is sitting in the landfill. So it's not just the use extension, it's the then what after that has to come along with it.
You're exactly right. And that gets into the design aspect. And then also the resource recovery aspect. So you're leading us here of saying, well, it's not just, okay, we did all this right. Now what? And I think we talked to Mulg already, where this is about actually how are you efficiently recovering items that may not actually be of use anymore, or pulling that apart even more, quite literally, how are we separating the components where some might be of use and others may not be? And if we can pull those apart, we can salvage the value accordingly. And that's critical. And in some ways, a project or a job or career that may not be worthy of human hands in the future, that human hands should be and human minds should be more productively used. And this is more of an AI and robotics system of resource recovery. Ultimately, this is where I just kind of wanted to lay out that juxtaposition, that we actually talk about this, and this is what got me thinking about this, is we talk about this coming up with our guest, Jon Smieja, VP of Circularity at Green Biz, where we talk about a little bit of the expectations that are being put on the development of circular economic solutions and how we have to both achieve growth, battle those maybe misconceptions or high expectations, and still provide value and still try to figure out what do we do going forward. And the best venue in which we can do that right now is building great companies, proving that value and demonstrating that value at a conference like Circularity, which we have coming up. And Circularity 24 is coming up here in Chicago, here for me, not for you. Hope you will be here. But it's coming up in Chicago, and we are, again, just very excited, especially in this city, to be able to host an event like that. Thoughts?
That's very, very, I mean, to your point, I mean, like an event like Circularity, they are moments and times or milestones almost where the entire industry has an opportunity to kind of like almost do a vibe check, right? Like in the 1.0, how much progress have we made in the year, and where are we going in the next year, and what are the new ideas or new points of connection? What has been successful, what hasn't been successful. So I really appreciate it. Can feel, if you haven't been to a Circularity or a large conference like that before, it can feel overwhelming because it's so much going on and it can feel like chaos, but it is organized chaos. I really like talking to Jon because it sounds super intentional the way they design the conference to create moments of connection and learning and make sure there's diversity and like the right allocation of like topic, time and space. So I guess in the world of 1.0, we're even figuring out how to like check in with each other, basically.
Check in.
I mean, where are we?
And you know, that I think we get into that a little bit too with that's where we have to hold intention, collaboration and competition and co-opetition, and how are we advancing forward while still trying to make money for some of these large businesses or even these startups. Well, the last opportunity to get some of the cheaper tickets are actually coming up on April 18th. I messed that up immediately. Actually, I've got it. It's April 19th. So it's April 19th. And you can still get, exactly. You can still get $450 off an all access pass. So please join us here in Chicago. Come share, come learn, come appreciate what we're trying to do in this industry. It's fairly welcoming, and I look forward to welcoming a lot of people as we, Sabira, get to shake some hands and meet some people. So that'll be a lot of fun.
And we are not sponsored. We've both been to this event, and we like it.
That's a great point. Yeah, exactly. Actually, that's a great call out. We're not sponsored, as much as this sounds like a sponsorship. And I think we kind of get to that of for me, and we talked about this with Jon, it was the way to demystify and not have myself be so intimidated by this industry by going and meeting people. So it's why it's of importance to me to talk about this conference. So thank you for listening, everybody. Again, great call out. Yeah, we're not sponsored. We're doing this. People, there's no sponsors yet coming. We hope so soon, but not this one.
Next year.
But yeah, exactly. Enjoy Jon. We got to really just get out there with some concepts and hear how he sees the industry. And it was a great interview and a great conversation.
Great to talk to him.
Yeah. Thank you, Jon. Thanks, Sabira. This is important to me to highlight to others in the industry that Green Biz initially was very intimidating. Coming as a new practitioner, someone in the startup business, that I thought there were conversations that I was not a part of, or there were concepts that were new to me, or there were relationships that were already there that I didn't want to somehow impede on or get in the middle of. I found that to be the exact opposite of an industry. My first Green Biz conference actually was Green Biz in Scottsdale. My first Circularity conference was in Minnesota. I found that to be, again, the exact opposite. It's a community that's quite welcoming, open to thoughts, open to introductions and putting your hand out. What has gone into that? What goes into that, do you think, as a convener? What about that allows for, if we reduce the barrier here for newbies who might be listening, let's get them comfortable with this idea of what this conference means.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it was the exact same for me, right? My first Green Biz run event was Verge, which is our biggest event in the fall on climate tech. And I felt the same way going in. I was a young professional. I was like, what am I doing here? And I wasn't that young because I spent a lot of time in graduate school before I got into it. But you go, before you get there, you feel intimidated by all the people you're going to meet. And I think what we've done to try to ease that for new attendees, young professionals, et cetera, we've done a few things. So, like you mentioned, the company is sort of built around convening, right? So that's plain and simple. We convene people through events, through our networks, our webcasts, and, to some extent, even our editorial coverage and our newsletters. There's a community built around a lot of those things. And as we're convening people, we really try to follow this servant leadership model. So, we talk to a lot of people every day. I have meetings all the time with people outside of the company to sort of learn, what their struggles are, what they're thinking about, what challenges they're running into, where they are having success. And then our job as a convener is to take all that information we're gathering from all these different places, whether it's NGOs, corporates, government agencies, et cetera. We need to take all that information, disseminate it into editorial coverage, into content for our events, into compelling discussions for our networks. And then on top of that, the sort of special piece that makes it feel like a community that you mentioned, Garr, is that we really are intentional. Our events team and our content creators are intentional about making a lot of opportunities for people to talk one-on-one in small groups at our events, right? At Circularity, Green Biz, all of our events for the most part, there's never a break between two sessions that's less than 30 minutes, right? We want people to talk between sessions. We want them to have a chance to get to know each other. We have receptions each night of our events, like that kind of thing we built in, simply to try to get people to connect on that personal level a little better. And then the other thing we've done, I think, that is helpful for young professionals especially, is our 30 under 30 program and our emerging leaders programs, right? We have these active ways to bring new people into our conferences so that other new people that aren't part of that program see themselves in the space. So I think we, having been a corporate sustainability practitioner for 10 years before I got to Green Biz, I do still think that we have a bit of a special formula there that helps people feel welcome and part of the community when they come to our events.
Do you think that there's anything extra or special or particular investments that you need to make in the convening, because circular economy is still a burgeoning, new-ish kind of term? in the context of the term sustainability, in the context of the term recycling? How has it evolved?
Yeah, so it was a really good question, because this event, the Circularity event that I lead, has only been around since 2019. This year in Chicago will only be our fourth in-person convening. For the most part, almost no one was using the term circular economy or circularity before maybe 2010, in that range, right, is when you first started to hear it. So it is a really new concept still. And I think the tricky thing about putting together a 2.5-day event or a network that meets every 2 weeks like I do around that topic is that everybody still has a lot of questions. For the most part, if someone's working specifically on circular economy at their company, a lot of them are the only ones, right? They might be part of a bigger sustainability team, but they feel a little bit alone in that they're focused on this one concept. And there's not a lot of good success to point out to, right? Like if you're talking, even if you take a part of the circular economy, right? If you're talking about waste reduction in manufacturing facilities, there's great examples of that all over the place, right? You can point to Subaru or Toyota or any big manufacturer that's done really good zero waste programs in their manufacturing facility. And you can say they're doing this right. You can learn from them. When it comes to a broader sort of like, I'm making my whole business circular, the examples tend to be small companies, right? They're startups, they're innovators. You don't have the like behemoth to point to say these people are really doing it right. So one thing we struggle with a lot in our conference is, how do we make it not all just an endless series of pilot programs that aren't going anywhere? How do we make it not just small innovators with 4 people working at their company doing great work, but struggling to scale? And maybe most importantly, going back to the sort of community feel and getting people excited, how do we make it not just about the challenges and the struggles that everybody's having? And I think that is where we're really put a lot of energy when we put content together for this event. Is, what are people doing that's working? What can they say about it that leaves people with an action that they can go away with? Like, how do I walk out of this 60-minute breakout with something that I can take back to my company and share? And then how do we build those spaces within the conference for people to learn from each other and talk one-on-one, where they don't have to follow the corporate talking points, right? Like, so those are sort of a few of the things that we really have to put a lot of focus on. And I would say that's true for all of our events, but in this circular economy space, there's just a little bit, I get the sense that a lot of large corporates are getting frustrated with their lack of progress. And so it adds this like layer of tension of like, how do we keep people excited?
How do we do the thing? Yeah. How do we do it? Yeah, I felt that. I have felt that in the past, and I want you to gut check me on this, because this is I've been talking to people. Some people ask me like, why are you in this industry? Why do you love circularity? What brings you almost the most joy in being in it? And one, it's the relationships.
Mm-hmm. And
from all of my research, it's the closest I can get probably of where I think our economy will be needing to go to what would be 1960s, 70s, 80s Silicon Valley. Like, I truly believe that, where the circles are small, and I don't mean with the full pun there. The circles of people where you're getting to know, or someone's working on this. And that environment, I think, was very conducive to both traditional business models and excelling traditional business models. This one, there are failures. There are barriers. Am I off on that? I mean, doesn't it really feel like we're all talking towards what needs to happen in the future?
Yeah.
We just need to figure out how to get there. And that's really what we're doing every year we get together. Is like, how do we get there?
Yeah, I don't claim to have any special knowledge in this space, but I do feel like that's right? I think that we're at a point where, I actually say this quite often when I talk to people, like, we all sort of know where we need to go.
Right.
Every business or every sector might have a slightly different way that they're going to get there. But one of the big challenges, one of the big roadblocks, well, I always think of 3 roadblocks, but the one that sort of stands in front of them all to me is that nobody working in industry right now has ever lived in a circular economy. we don't know what it looks like.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so we're building something, and this is actually goes back to your Silicon Valley in the 70s point of view, right? It's like we're building something that nobody has seen.
Right.
And so therefore it creates a challenge of creativity, of collaboration, things that honestly we're not all that good at, especially in big corporate spaces, right? So we really need to push that past that barrier first. And then I think what can sometimes be disheartening to people, but one of the reasons I enjoy this is even once you get past that barrier, you've got several more, right? There's a lack of infrastructure, right? If we create products that can be sent back and reused or recycled or refurbished or remanufactured, we still have to build that whole infrastructure to do that. There's a lot of times investing in that infrastructure leads to long payback periods, which companies are, allergic to. And then there's just like there's the structural sort of incumbency bias, right? If I come out with a new material or a new product or a new method, it's got to be better, cheaper, faster, more convenient than the old one, or everybody's going to say, well, why would I change? And so I think we're faced with a bunch of really big problems, and therefore it's sort of fun to work in this because the only people that want to spend time in this tend to be sort of big thinkers, right? Like, how do we overcome all these big problems? And so it makes for a good community feel, I think.
And then just to throw in, we tend to be the ones also that can accept the no's, can accept the failures and go, okay, we got to tweak this, we got to move and pivot this, and then figure out, because really that's what we're avoiding, those incumbent business models. We're avoiding the incumbent players of an organization that are like, we're not changing. This is what we're doing. And it's like, all right, well, then we're going to try to go this way and do something creatively this way. So, yeah.
And if you're working in a big corporate, like I used to, you almost feel like a little bit of a heretic, right? Like you're like trying to change the whole business from within and nobody really wants to do it. So there's a little bit of that feel too, of you're sort of, almost a spy within trying to figure out what levers you can pull to change the system.
Well, actually, I want to pull on that thread a little more, because what the large corporates that you do tend to convene, you were mentioning, right? There's only like one person who has a circular economy title. You might be the little witch in the corner, right? Like trying to change magically everything. But I guess maybe can you share a little bit of light on, is there a conversation happening that like, this is not enough? Like we can have these big dreams, we can be big thinkers, but if we want the corporates to change, like you need to invest more with the infrastructure mindset instead of the like quick returns mindset. And to do that, you need bigger teams who can be creative, who can be collaborative. Like, it's been 4 years of circularity. Are we still like too early for that conversation? Are we headed there? Like where are we at?
Yeah, I think the conversation is starting to happen a little bit more broadly. I'll go back to, sort of the first circularity that you mentioned, Garr, back in 2019 in Minneapolis. Oddly enough, I was working at Anderson Windows at the time, and I was on the host committee because Anderson is here just outside of Minneapolis. So I was on the host committee for that first event. And I went to those meetings and I thought, like, oddly enough, all of these people in this room have said that they focus on circular economy. And I'm thinking about circular economy at Anderson, but I've never met any of these people. I don't know who any of these people are. And so there was this sense that even as recently as 5 years ago, we didn't know each other. We didn't know how to make connections. We didn't really know how to build I hate to use this term, but we didn't know how to build a movement, right? We didn't know how to build a community that could do this. And I think we've started to get there. So that's sort of the first step. Right now we've got, with any luck, somewhere around 2,000 people will be in Chicago this year to join this conference. It's been growing steadily. We see a steady increase in the number of jobs that mention circular economy in places like LinkedIn. So we're seeing that growth. And on top of that, what we're starting to see, and what I was referring back to 2019 for, is that was almost all sustainability or circular economy practitioners. What we see at our event now is we're drawing still a small number, but we're drawing designers, supply chain professionals, communications and marketing teams. Like, we're starting to get people that aren't, their core function is not circular economy or sustainability. And I think that's sort of when you can start to really have something to grab onto, to have broader conversations about, outside of our own echo chambers. And so I think we are getting there. I think it's slower than everybody that works in this space wants, but it seems like we're making a lot of progress towards real meaningful discussions. And there are companies making big investments, but we just haven't seen the returns from those investments yet in the way that we'd like to. So it's slow, but making progress, right?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of speaks to then an adoption curve angle to this, where, how do we start to see it pick up a little steam? I'm not saying I hope I don't do myself any disfavors here by talking about the expectations of VCs, which is sort of a steep adoption. Everyone's making money, all things are good. I think it's going to take a little bit longer. I think these are complicated systems, but the adoption is there nonetheless. And I think we've seen this kind of start to be more prevalent with newer business models. Large manufacturers or brands thinking about this in the fashion space is a big one, where we start to see the re-commerce efforts and the different various companies that are popping up to, like a Recurate, a Trove, these companies that are focused on getting product back and then stitching them together, doing this for larger brands like Patagonia or Lulu. You've seen this start to happen. I mean, even in the 4 years, we've seen various packaging companies start to have this model. We love opining here too a little bit and talking about, what do we expect? What do you think is the future in this way of this type of adoption? I mean, are we on a slow but steady march for a movement, or is there some other scenario we should be looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to be as well. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be as steady as we might want it to be. Right? We just got news, here right before we're speaking about how Renewcell, the cotton to cotton recycler, filed for bankruptcy. Right? So they scaled their facility. They had a really promising technology, and the challenge was, maybe the market was asking for it, but wasn't quite ready for some of the ramifications that went along with adopting this new material, right? So we're going to see things like that happen. But one thing you mentioned, Garr, that I think is really important as far as like, will this scale? What does this sort of curve look like? Is once you start to see these support infrastructure companies succeed, right?
Yes.
Like you mentioned, Trove, Archive, Recurate. I mean, there's a bunch of them in the re-commerce textile space, right? That are all, they're all sort of, they're all growing. They all seem successful. They're all still in business. That's a good sign. And I always think about my favorite example of what this could look like in the future. And it's not going to look the same for every sector, but like, the model example of what a circular economy could look like is really automotive. I mean,
yes,
they've got the business model down, right? Not only will they sell you a new car, they will also lease you one, or they'll sell you a used one, or in some cases they'll lease you a used one. You've got all these different ways to interact with them. They keep you as part of their business by offering maintenance and service, right? And that's all really good. They'll take back your car at the end of its life, even if it doesn't run anymore, and they'll give you something for it. But then the other cool thing about what that industry has seen is the cottage industry pop up around it, right? We don't think of it as cottage anymore, but you've got all the car rental services, you've got independent auto body shops, you've got used car dealerships, you've got, all of these websites that support consumer to consumer sale of vehicles. So like, obviously not every sector can do that because not every product is a $20,000 or $30,000 product start. So there's different value structures there, but like, I think we can learn a lot from that. So I think what we need is we need to continue to find ways for innovators that support circular economy business models to succeed. Whether that's reverse logistics companies, re-commerce companies, cleaning, repair, remanufacturing companies, like all of those. Yeah.
Reman. Yes.
all of those industries have a place in this system. And the only way that the big companies are really going to be able to implement circular economy at scale, and I think we might see a steep incline as opposed to a slow march, is once those support infrastructure things are in place. And that might
Yes.
take years. It might take some public and private investment. Like it might take a combination of things, but I think there's an opportunity there that this could scale really quickly. I just had, I think there's only two, but one of the two major railway systems presented at one of my recent network meetings, and they're thinking a lot about how do we support a circular economy? How do we become a reverse logistics partner when a lot of people wouldn't think of us initially, right? A lot of people would think of over the road. But there's a place for the railways. There's a place for over the road. There's a place for recyclers and MRFs. Like there's just a lot of things that need to grow. And I think once we hit some critical mass of those support structures, it seems like this is bound to take off. That was a long-winded answer.
I love it.
That's great. And I have one highlight there before we jump to you, Sabira, which is the fact even that Vogue covered Renewal Cell might be a win. Like that also, like that the fact that a mainstream media source would cover something like this type of technology and product and model, that while it didn't work, baby win there, that someone's paying attention at these mainstream sources too. Yeah.
Well, I was curious, like, so we've seen it, you were mentioning auto, right? Auto, high value, low frequency purchase, but high usage, right? So like, it's where like the rental and the cleaning and maintenance, like that's where the infrastructure all comes in. Fashion is on the like kind of total opposite, high volume, high frequency of purchase, maybe low frequency of usage, low value relative, right?
Yep.
If you're betting on which industry picks up circularity and like wins next, or which ones should over the next, like what is stack rank, like who should be up next at bat?
Oh man, I usually only bet on sports and and blackjack, but I think to me, from what we're seeing, as I have discussions with companies, industry associations, other people working in this space, we're seeing a lot of really good momentum. I mean, obviously there's good momentum in fashion, but there's the value of the materials challenge, right? And so if you talk to the people doing research on who's going to succeed in re-commerce of fashion, who should even be exploring it, they'll talk about like, obviously luxury makes sense. The sort of upper mid market, like the nicer apparel that, has a sort of medium value at the beginning, but like they'll tell you straight, like flat out, that like some of the fast fashion stuff, they shouldn't bother because there's not enough value in the materials. And that's frustrating. But anyway, I think that the two sectors that I'm seeing a lot of progress in right now are the built environment and consumer electronics. And in the built environment, I think the driver really is ever since I started in that industry 11 years ago now, the sort of growth of the discussion around embodied carbon of buildings has just been increasing and increasing, because everybody in that industry understands that as buildings become more and more decarbonized through their electricity usage, electrification of HVAC systems and things like that, that their use phase carbon emissions are going to keep going down. We know that over time. But whatever embodied carbon is in that building, you're stuck with. Like that's part of your building's footprint and it's never going away. So the idea of creating building products, furnishings and finishings, lighting and things like that can be replaced and circulated is really starting to gain a lot of steam. We're actually hosting a building product manufacturers forum for the first time at Circularity this year to bring those people together into a room to talk about how they advance circular economy. So that industry, I think, is poised for growth. And then the other thing that's cool about that industry is there's also a lot of really interesting innovators out there that are coming up with new ways to assemble buildings so that they can be easily taken apart, modularized. It works really well for things like, single level retail, like let's say like your drive-through coffee shop. It's a perfect candidate for something like a modular building that might last 10 to 15 years. And then the panels can be taken apart and reused somewhere else. So the building sector, again, high value, long replacement cycles in most cases. They're sort of poised for growth. consumer electronics is an interesting one, right? Because I think they're being pushed by regulation around the world, by sort of a license to operate in some parts of the world, right? Like, if you go to some parts of the world and you see the piles of e-waste that are not being processed or handled correctly, you kind of get an idea of how bad the situation is right now. It's also, I think, the fastest growing waste stream in the world. And on top of that, now they have a new competitor for some of the minerals they need in the electric vehicle industry. So now they're thinking more and more about how do we maintain the value of the materials in our products. And we've seen progress here, right? Like I know Dell, HP, Lenovo all have resale, refurbished products that you can buy. They're working along with their corporate partners to be able to redistribute products. So those are the two that I think are next. And again, if you look at a spectrum of like you mentioned, Sabira, the sort of low frequency purchase, high usage, high value on one side, and then all the way on the other side is like things like consumer packaged goods, right? Food and beverage, personal care items, the things that you may only use for one time and then you have something to dispose of. I think as you think about that spectrum of value and frequency of purchase, there's going to be different triggers along that whole spectrum that cause some sort of tide to change and people to start thinking more about it. If it's on that sort of cheap consumer goods packaging end of the spectrum, it might be regulation, right? It might be the Global Plastics Treaty or extended producer responsibility, things like that could force them to change. Whereas on the high value, they might just realize like, hey, this is a good business move for us to be more circular. And then there's everything in between. And so I think that is actually, it's also one of the exciting things about working in the space, but also one of the challenging things about putting a conference together on it is that there's just so many different levers to pull, so many different considerations depending on what sector you're in. And so, we've got to try to find how to speak to everybody and inspire everybody to move regardless of where they sit in this giant net.
What I've appreciated about you all in that is your willingness, because not every conference can be this or wants to even do this, but willingness to hear the industry for what the industry calls for, or what other industries within circular economy are saying. Hey, we have a constituency group here that's very interested in this. Because I think I can say this, and you could check me on this, Jon, which is, the first one was very sustainable packaging focused. There was a lot of that in the first one. That's not the case anymore. There's different tracks, and I think that was a responsive effort by you all to say, okay, great, let's add some more here. So we broaden the horizon a little bit, enlarge the tent. And so I think that's a credit to you all, because not every conference is like that. They can kind of this is what we do, this is our thing, to go somewhere else if you don't want to be here.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple things there. One, it has to be a big tent, right? There's no, even if you're Amazon or one of these giant companies, you can't do this alone, right? So you need partner, you need supply chain partners both up and downstream from you to sort of help you figure this out. You're not going to lone wolf your way to a fully circular business. So there's that part of it. The other thing that energizes me about having all of these different industries in the same building for 2.5 days is that when I worked in the built environment, I didn't learn that much from other people in the built environment. I learned things from people in other sectors, because you'd get that they'd have a creative idea that might work for their sector, and you'd say, I wonder if I can apply that to windows and doors or furniture where I used to work.
Yes.
And so there was this there's an interesting, there's a reason we try to build diverse teams with people who think differently, right? And that's kind of how I see this conference being a sort of an avenue to lead to new collaborations, is getting people to talk to each other that wouldn't otherwise have that opportunity. And we try to do the same thing in our network. Our peer-to-peer learning network is like, we're welcome to any sector, as long as you're willing to participate and share your ideas. And so that's kind of how this conference works too. And I think it's to our benefit. I think it's to our attendees' benefit, and hopefully it's to the benefit of this movement around circular economy that we're bringing all these different people together.
And that is one of my favorite elements to see at a conference, let's put it that way, where you'll get 3 competitors on a panel. And ultimately, we're dealing with probably the tension right now of, if we're thinking about what our circular future looks like, it probably does look more cross-functional learnings, co-opetition. There's more working with third parties who are working with your competitors, but enabling the circular future. But I love seeing that in real time on a panel where everyone's like, they get to kind of go, I love what you did with that project. And the other person gets to go, I love what you did with your project. And then they get to talk about the mixed results or what did or didn't work. And I think that's such a fascinating part of our industry that we're finding, which is just all of that needs to be shared and be open. There's stuff that could be proprietary, but our future is in the pre-competitive phase right now of these learnings.
Yeah, and we had a really interesting situation happen in one of our network meetings. This was last year. I had somebody from a consumer tech company and somebody from a fertilizer company, of all people, realized halfway through a discussion that the consumer tech company had a chemical that the fertilizer company needed as a precursor. And like, I don't think they've actually made that partnership yet, but they had a conversation, right? They learned from each other that, like, hey, we don't have to source this direct from some chemical supplier. Maybe we can get it from somebody who's using it and has it as a byproduct, right? So there's like all of these cool things that happen, and which is one of the reasons that I'm sort of excited to be in this role, is that I get the opportunity to bring those people together and hear them learn from each other in real time, and sort of light bulbs going off all over the place. So.
That's so cool. I was also thinking about, like, you were talking about the composition of the attendees, and I guess I'm trying to think of this as the industry in general. Like, what is a healthy ratio of like big fish to little fish, right? Like the Amazons to the, and this is like not only at Circularity, but then wider, but like even in the conference, like what would be the right mix so that you get that catalyzing conversation? I'm thinking like, I'm like going back to chemistry, right? Like what's actually gonna lead to the spark?
I think you have a degree in that, right, Jon, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes. Too many degrees in chemistry for my own good. That's a really good question. I think where I'll start, which I think is kind of interesting, is we have our Green Biz event, which is really sort of corporate sustainability strategy. We have this circular economy event. We have a green finance ESG investing event, and then we have our climate tech event. And if you look across those, well, we also have a nature and biodiversity event that just started last year. So we have these 5 events, and if you look across them, where you see the biggest ratio, I guess, of innovators, small fish to big fish, is in circular economy and climate tech, because those people are needed to innovate, to come up with new solutions to move us forward. When it comes to corporate sustainability and strategy, you get a lot more like big fish and service providers that work with those big fish, right? Because a lot of the concepts are now 20, 25 years old, so they're sort of building on existing knowledge. So I think the interesting thing is, at our event, at the circular economy event, Circularity, I think we're generally somewhere in that like 20-ish% of the audience is innovators. And it seems like a pretty good mix, because that means that when we're putting people on panel discussions, putting people on the keynote stage, building sessions, we've got enough innovators that have really creative, amazing ideas that they want to get in front of those big companies. We have enough of those people that we can sort of spread them out throughout the conference and have this innovative feel everywhere. But our conference also wouldn't work if it was half or 3/4 innovators, right? Then they'd be talking to each other, and that's helpful to learn, but it's not helpful to scale their businesses. So the idea of bringing the people that need innovation in the same room with the people that have the innovations. And then the other cool thing that we also have at the circular economy, any circular economy discussion, you need the governments as well, right? Cities are leading the way on this, counties and states. To some degree, countries, maybe not our country here in the US, but elsewhere, are sort of leading the charge on how do we advance circular economy. So we also have the governments in the room. So it's a really good mix. But I would say, you know, that like when I look through my registration list, I love to see, you know, 15 to 25% innovators that have really cool ideas that they want to talk to the giants about.
To any innovator who's listening, maybe, and thinking about Green Biz, let me give a piece of advice, though, is just share your ideas. You can ease up on the pitching. The pitching part can be problematic because, you know, when we're talking about how many people are getting, can we do a pilot? Can we do it's like, no, ease back. Just share it, be friendly, talk about ideas. That's like where I found my perfect little nice mix, which is if someone asks the follow-up question, tell me more.
Yeah.
Go all in. Just do it. But other than that, shake some hands, meet some people, talk about great ideas. And I think that's a great thing for an innovator to be able to do in a space like this.
Yeah, and one thing I was amazed by, you know, when I switched from corporate sustainability to this role at GreenBiz leading circularity, it was a sort of a light bulb moment for me in that I had not been as curious as out there looking for new solutions as I would have liked to be, because I was busy doing a lot of other things within the corporate space. And so as an innovator, if you're at an event like this, like you said, Garr, like you don't need to sell, really, you just need to teach people. Like you can teach them a lot about what you're doing just by having a conversation, because they probably, in a lot of cases, haven't heard of you. And so just like the fact that this can be a place where corporate practitioners can come to learn what's going on elsewhere outside of their corporate bubble is interesting too.
I love that idea of bring your learnings. Just bring what you have to offer of, hey, this is what I've been working on. Anybody interested? And more than likely, someone's going to want to talk to you about it. So,
yep.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, like, how you've seen corporate churn impact the pace of circular economy discussions. Because I'm trying to think of my experiences at Circularity. How many relationships did I form that stayed useful, mutually beneficial over a long period of time? And if I could probably count on my one hand, and like, to me, that's still of major value, right? Because those are really key and useful connections. But like this, I'm like thinking, oh, once I met a guy from eBay, but like, is he even there still? Like, what did he do? What's he doing now? You know, so like, how does that, I mean, that's like the nature of societal organizations and companies in general, but does that hurt us? Is it fine because those guys go on or gals go on to do something else? Like, what's kind of the stasis?
For that guy from eBay, hit us up. We'd love to talk to you. If you remember Sabira. Yeah, exactly.
Damn, I want to know who that guy is too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it has to slow us down a little bit. It's one of those things. It's kind of like if you work at a company that doesn't do a good job of succession planning when someone's retiring, and you lose all that knowledge and that basis of work and all those connections externally. I mean, large organizations in general are not that good at that, right? If they know someone's leaving for a different role, they're not gonna backfill them and have the new person follow them around for 3 months to learn everything from them. That's just not. It's not how businesses work. So I think it is slowing us down. You know, some of the projects that I worked on when I was in corporate sustainability probably got significantly slowed down or dropped just because I didn't do a good job of passing them on to the person that was coming after me. And so I think it does hurt. I think the good thing about it, I think the sort of, to put the positive spin on the churn, is that if you have people moving, you know, not competitor to competitor necessarily, but to new industries, new sectors, new companies, they can bring that knowledge of like how that other company was thinking about this to the new one and bring new ideas. So, you know, it's hard to say where it nets out on whether it slows us down or speeds us up, but it's hard to imagine it doesn't slow down a little bit in some cases, just because of the, you know, the relationships that you build with partners as you stay at a company for a long time. So, it's a big challenge. And one of the things that I realized when I was in corporate sustainability is sometimes the only way to really move up and advance your career is to go to a different company, because the teams are small. And so you don't get a lot of opportunities to just sort of climb the ladder, for lack of a better way to put it, unless you find a new place with new responsibilities. So it's probably something we need to deal with better if we want to really make a dent.
Yeah, I think that speaks to, I kind of love both your thoughts on that. That speaks to just the continuity in general of ideas and innovation and how we continue to pass the baton. And I've had to come around on this of my role as a aspiring innovator, where what is my role to just be a part of that, of just creating my block and the thing that I'm really interested in building, what I think can, but eventually I'm going to have to hand that off to someone else and say, hey, maybe this company can take it forward more, or maybe it's not a great idea. That's a possibility too. But I love that continuity because it speaks to us just being a part in the broader movement of just continuing the march.
Well, and real quickly, Sabira, going back to the comments earlier about my chemistry degrees, this is one place where I think the sciences have to some degree figured it out, right? Is like you are expected when you're working in a lab to document everything you do so that somebody can do it later. And that's
I love that.
Not necessarily the case in the corporate space, right? You might document things, but not necessarily a blueprint for somebody to pick it up when you leave. So there's like an expectation in a lab that you're making sure the next person can pick up your project and run with it. And I think we could learn a lot from that that culture, I guess, in corporate space.
What a great idea. No, you're exactly right. Is that is what we forget almost in the grind of it all and trying to figure it out and try to for-profit organizations, they want to make money. The loss of industry knowledge, institutional knowledge to advance some of these solutions forward. I think that's huge.
Do I want to write everything in a lab book? Absolutely not.
Right.
It would probably be helpful.
Well, you know what's scary about that and maybe crazy, fun, and innovative thing about? Maybe that's the role of AI in the future. Is really helping us be more human, and then the documentation process allowing us to excel at what makes us being creative, not necessarily being
that's a good point.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, we're
I wish there was an AI that could pull my ideas out of my head as I'm trying to fall asleep, because I always end up having to get up and tape them before I go to bed. But maybe that is the future.
A scary future of Neuralink, then maybe too. Yeah, that's just coming right from our stream of sleep consciousness. Well, I've got one more question. Sabira's got one more, but mine is we're a couple months out. What do we get to expect from what we now have for Circularity 24 in Chicago? My dream scenario here.
It's starting to look like a really, really exciting program. We are, as I mentioned earlier, we're growing, right? In 2022, we had 900 people at the conference in Atlanta. Last year in Seattle, we had 1,400. This year, we're expecting 1,800 to 2,000. So the community is growing. As a result, that means we're getting, more and more ideas coming at us for what to highlight in the event, more speaker proposals, just more to draw from, which makes my team's job really difficult. We have way more ideas than we have space for within the program. But what we're doing this year, we always base our conferences on tracks. We have 6 tracks. Not going to go into them because they're actually not. They might guide what you look at throughout the program, but they're sort of tough to really navigate around because a lot of our sessions are sort of cross-industry, cross-sectoral, cross-functional, and so you get a lot of cross-listed tracks as a result. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to build content that really speaks to all of the different sectors that are showing up at our conference. So we will have quite a bit of content on the built environment and consumer electronics and fashion, because those are sort of the 3 fastest growing sections of our audience and the fastest growing, like if you look in the news around circular economy, those are the industries that are investing. So those 3 things are going to show up big in the event. There will still be plenty of consumer packaged goods and plastics and packaging, because that's a key part of this transition. We really need to stop flooding our environment with synthetic materials and figure out how to clean that whole system up. So that'll still be a big part of it as well. we have a whole track of content, as well as a bunch woven throughout other sessions on policy and how policy might enable the transition to a circular economy. And then we are actually going to do a full workshop on communications. How does a company talk about this? What is the best way to not only talk about it internally to your colleagues, but also externally to share with the world what you're doing in this space? And that can feel tricky, right? Because it's new and people don't want to greenwash and all those things. So that's a lot about like sort of the nuts and bolts of the content. I'm putting the keynote. We have 2 different keynote programs, 90 minutes on each of the first 2 days. The first day is really going to be focused on how individuals working on this space continue to do it despite the frustration and the no's and the failures, right? How do you keep your head up? How do you maintain hope? And how do you sort of find some solace in the small wins? How do you celebrate those small wins as you go? So the first day is really going to be about how the individual working in this space can keep moving forward. And the second day then is going to transition to how does the collective work together? So how do all these individuals within this universe work together and collaborate to really advance the circular economy faster? We've got some really exciting speakers, including Gary Cooper, founder of Reaply, will be on our keynote stage. I'm excited to have him in his hometown. So yeah, that's sort of, we're in that phase now, about 2.5 months out or whatever it is, where we're really starting to finish a lot of sessions, really starting to put a lot of meat on the program, and that's showing up now on our website for people to check out as we build sessions and add them to the program. So.
Cool. And actually, you previewed my question unbeknownst to you, but our last question generally is, what gives you hope? So it sounds like you're going to inspire others to do that at Circularity 2024. But for you, Jon, what keeps you going in this long journey of the transition?
Yeah, my answer now is probably a lot different than it would have been 2 years ago when I was in corporate sustainability. But when I was in the corporate space, which a lot of our attendees obviously will be, I had to learn to celebrate small wins and not overlook them as like, oh, that was inevitable, that was going to happen anyway. Because the big wins are often few and far between, right? So that was sort of how I looked at it before I took on this role leading circularity at GreenBiz. Now I really do find hope, and it kind of goes back to the very beginning of our conversation, in the convening, in the bringing people together, and the amount of talent and creativity in the group that we bring together at this conference or in my network meetings is just like, it shocks me every time I talk to these people how great they are. And so I find hope in the people that have chosen to devote their careers to this topic. Even in, the absence of really big progress that we're seeing globally, I think just the idea that people, smart, talented, creative people, are putting their efforts into this, that's what I really enjoy about it right now.
So then this is where I get to jump in with the plug that if you want to meet those other smart, talented people, come join us at Circularity 24 in Chicago, May 21st through the 22nd, 23rd?
22nd to the 24th. It's Wednesday through Friday this year.
Excellent.
And it's going to be great. It's a great time to be in Chicago, right?
Yes, it is. It's flowers and one of the best. Yes.
So yeah, it'll we're really looking forward to it. Being a conference that moves from city to city each year is really fun. We get to see a different sort of local innovators, local NGOs, environmental justice groups that are sort of working on the ground in these spaces, and get to know those people. And that's also really fun to be able to see that in different cities every year.
Well, I love that, and I'm excited to learn what the next one is too. So I'm sure we'll learn that in May. Thank you, Jon. Thanks for joining us here today. Please reach out to us if you want to hopefully get connected to Jon, or through our LinkedIn's, and we can help maybe connect more innovators and more people and more topics.
Thank you both so much.
Thanks for the time.